cameras rolled. Bright lights glared from above, and the studio buzzed with media energy. Anchors smiled politely. Global flags lined the massive LED screens behind them. Viewers from over 90 countries tuned in for what was meant to be a peaceful debate on U.S.-Africa relations. Seated to the right, President Donald Trump leaned back confidently in a navy suit, smirking. On the other side of the table sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calm, poised, his military jacket pressed, his face unreadable. For the first 10 minutes, the air was thick with politeness. But then something shifted. Trump turned toward the camera and said, "You know, we're giving billions to these countries. And what do we get in return? Clowns, criminal clowns, like him." He pointed, right at Traoré. The studio gasped. Even the anchors froze. Traoré blinked. His fingers twitched slightly on the desk. The room fell into a strange silence. No one expected what was coming next, and no one knew this moment would change global politics forever. Traoré didn't respond, not at first. He stared at the table, silent, his lips pressed tight. A camera zoomed in. You could see his fingers, trembling. The insult echoed in his head. Criminal clown. The audience in the studio looked stunned. A woman near the front covered her mouth. An intern dropped their notepad. On the other side of the table, Trump leaned back smugly, as if he had just won a game of chess. But this wasn't chess. This was personal, and something was building. One of the anchors tried to break the tension with a weak chuckle. "Mr. Trump, let's keep things respectful." But Traoré finally spoke. His voice cracked, just slightly. "Do you know what it's like to bury children after a drone strike?" he said, eyes fixed on the table. The room went dead silent. "You call me a clown, but I've held mothers as they cried over burned babies." He looked up, tears welling in his eyes. The cameras kept rolling. The audience leaned in, breathless. This wasn't politics anymore. This was pain. Traoré's voice shook. "I wasn't going to say this," he whispered, "but maybe the world should know." He turned to the camera, and the camera didn't flinch. There was a boy in northern Burkina Faso. His name was Zacharia. He was 7. Big eyes, always laughed when it rained. Traoré took a long breath. His eyes began to water. One morning, a U.S. drone hit his village. Wrong intel, they said. Just a mistake. Zacharia was playing with a stick in the mud. He paused. The studio was dead still. Even Trump looked confused now. "I picked up what was left of him with my bare hands," Traoré said, voice cracking again. His mother screamed until she passed out. You could hear sniffles from the studio audience. One cameraman wiped his eye. "I joined the military not to fight America," Traoré continued. "I joined to make sure boys like Zacharia don't die in silence." Trump opened his mouth to speak, but this time he didn't. Not a single word came out, and just like that, the world started listening. For a few seconds it looked like Trump might laugh, but he didn't. Something in Traoré's story had unsettled him. Still, he tried to regain control. "Well," Trump said, "we do what we must to fight terrorism. Sad things happen in war. That's just how it goes." Traoré turned to him slowly. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady now. "You bomb schools and call it security. You arm warlords and call it democracy. You disrespect my people and call it diplomacy." He reached into his jacket. Security tensed, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a small folded Burkina flag, stained with dried blood. "This was found in Zacharia's hand," Traoré said softly, placing it on the table between them. "Burned, but not destroyed." The studio froze. Trump stared at the flag. Cameras zoomed in. The blood was real. "No one helped his family," Traoré continued. "No apology, no aid, nothing." The anchors looked down, speechless. Call me what you want, Traoré said, but I carry the pain your country buried. The flag sat silently between them, more powerful than any insult. And finally, Trump had nothing to say. The silence hung heavy. You could hear the faint buzz of the studio lights. Then, one of the anchors broke the quiet. Captain Traoré, you said no one helped Zacharia's family. But that's not entirely true, is it? Traoré looked up slowly. The camera cut to a new angle. Behind the scenes, a woman in a gray hijab stood near the edge of the studio. Her eyes were red from crying. She held a crumpled photo in her hand. Traoré's face changed. Pain, shock, recognition. The anchor turned toward the camera. Her name is Awa Diallo. She's Zacharia's mother. We invited her here because the world needs to hear from her too. The woman stepped forward slowly. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Captain Traoré was the only one who stayed, she said in a trembling voice. The only one who helped bury the children. He fed us when we had nothing. He listened when no one else would. She looked directly at Trump. You call him a clown, but to me, he was the only human left that day. The audience cried. Even the crew behind the cameras wiped their eyes. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was truth, raw and painful. Awa Diallo reached into her handbag and pulled out a wrinkled, sealed envelope. I was going to burn this, she said softly, but maybe now is the right time. She handed it to the anchor, who hesitated, then began to read aloud. It was from Zacharia's older brother, Amadou, written weeks after the bombing, before he died from injuries sustained in the same strike. Dear President of America, the letter read, you said we were free. But why did you kill my little brother? He was just playing. He had no gun. He wanted to be a doctor. He loved goats and mangoes. The room was dead silent. The anchor's voice cracked as she read on. I don't know if you're sorry, but I hope one day someone like Captain Ibrahim will protect kids like us. She stopped reading. Tears streamed down her face. Traoré looked down, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Trump looked cornered. For once, no words, no insult, no comeback. The live stream chat exploded. Thousands of viewers were crying. Hearts flooded the screen, and millions waited, breath held, to see what Traoré would say next. Just as the studio tried to regain control, a new alert flashed on the LED wall behind the anchor. Breaking. West African leaders react live. The producers cut in a live feed from Mali. President Assimi Goïta stood before a podium, visibly emotional. His voice trembled. I've known Captain Traoré for years, he said. He has stood beside grieving families when no cameras were watching. He has fought for dignity, not fame. Behind him, a large photo of Zacharia and Amadou filled the screen. I was with him the day he gave his own food to war widows in Dori. The world sees a soldier, but I see a brother who carries pain like a second skin. The audience in the international studio wiped their eyes. Even the hosts began to lose their composure. Then Goïta's voice dropped low. But for a man who launched wars from a golf course to mock a grieving African leader on live air, he paused. Isn't just disrespect, it's cruelty. The camera cut back to Trump. His smile was gone, and across the globe people began choosing sides. Traoré hadn't just defended himself. He had become a symbol of buried truth. As the global feed continued, the studio fell into a strange, heavy silence. Cameras panned slowly across the faces of the audience, many now red-eyed, some sobbing quietly. That's when Traoré leaned forward again. His voice was soft, but every word sliced through the room. Do you know why Zacharia was playing outside that morning? He asked, not looking at anyone. The hosts shook their heads. Because the night before, Traoré said, he told his mother, tomorrow I'm going to fly. He paused. He thought the new American drones were kites, beautiful machines in the sky. A few people gasped. He ran into the open field, arms out, chasing what he thought would lift him up. Traoré's hands began to shake again. He covered his mouth, took a breath. When we found his body, he was holding a toy plane made from scrap plastic, burnt, melted into his skin. The camera zoomed in on Trump. He looked haunted. The chat on the live stream erupted. "I'm crying." How could anyone say that to him? Captain Traoré deserves respect. This wasn't just about one insult anymore. This was about everything that had been silenced. Backstage, producers scrambled. Phones rang non-stop. Justice for Zacharia was now trending in over 40 countries. But inside the studio, one chair remained empty. It was meant for a U.S. defense advisor, someone expected to balance the conversation. But after hearing Traoré speak, she refused to come out. The anchor leaned in, whispering to her mic. She says she can't face this. She's crying in the hallway. A silence followed. Trump sat stiff, arms crossed. But something in his eyes had shifted. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked lost. Traoré turned to him, calm now. "You don't know me, but I've watched your policies from the other side of the world. They made us bleed." Trump didn't speak. "You called me a clown," Traoré added, "but clowns perform for applause. I buried children when no one was watching." He looked toward the camera again. "And I'm still standing. Not because I'm strong, but because someone has to be." The final image of the chapter. An empty chair glowing under the bright lights. It said everything. And the world kept watching. Just when the world thought it had heard enough, another alert flashed across the studio LED wall. Live Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo addresses the UN. Producers scrambled. The studio switched to the feed. President Akufo-Addo stood alone at a podium in New York, the UN General Assembly behind him. Cameras zoomed in. His voice was quiet but firm. "I did not come here to speak about Burkina Faso," he began. "But after what I saw live just now, I can't stay silent." He took a breath. The way Captain Traoré was spoken to, disrespected, humiliated, and insulted, is a mirror of how African dignity has been treated for decades. His words rang out like a thunderclap. "We're not clowns. We are survivors. We are builders. We are mourners of children we didn't kill." A standing ovation began, rippling through the UN chamber. Back in the studio, Traoré didn't blink, but his jaw clenched. Trump lowered his gaze, and the world realized something rare had just happened. A quiet African soldier, without raising his voice, had silenced an empire. With the world watching, the pressure built. The studio anchor cleared her throat, voice shaky. "Mr. Trump, would you like to respond?" Trump leaned forward. He adjusted his tie, looked into the camera, then said, "I stand by my words." A collective gasp ran through the studio. Even the sound technician whispered, "Oh my God." "You can cry on TV," Trump said coldly. "You can show photos, flags, letters. But in the end, facts are facts. I protected my country. That's my job." A chill passed through the room. "But what about the drone strike?" one anchor asked. "The letter? The children?" Trump shrugged. "Collateral damage. It happens." A woman in the audience stood up, eyes full of tears. "That wasn't damage. That was my cousin's child." Traoré slowly turned to her. She covered her mouth and cried. Still, Trump didn't budge. "This is why emotion should stay out of policy." The anchor shook her head. "So no apology?" Trump smirked. "Not today." He leaned back in his chair. And right there, every silent viewer became a witness. Not just to war, but to what happens when truth meets pride. And pride wins. Just as the segment was about to end, a producer ran onto the set. Wait, we have a final guest. The camera swung to the side. A girl walked into the studio, no more than 9 years old, small, quiet. Her scarf fluttered behind her. She held a white envelope. Everyone stared. Even Trump sat up. The anchor knelt beside her. "Who are you, sweetheart?" "I'm Mariam," she said. "Zacharia was my brother." Traoré blinked. His breath caught. The girl opened the envelope and unfolded a piece of paper. Her hands shook as she read, "I wrote this last night. I wanted to tell my brother. We still love him, even if he's gone." Her voice cracked. "I miss the way he ran, the way he laughed. I still sleep on his side of the bed." The anchor was crying now. "I'm not angry," Mariam said, "but I hope one day someone tells the truth." She looked directly at Trump. "Do you remember his name, Zacharia?" Trump's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time all night, he looked afraid. The world watched this little girl hold more power than any president, and at that moment, history changed. Outside the studio, something unexpected was happening. Crowds were gathering, all across Africa. In Ouagadougou, Accra, Bamako, Dakar, people took to the streets. But they weren't angry. They weren't violent. They were crying. Thousands held candles. Others lifted photos of Zacharia and Amadou. Some carried cardboard signs that read, "Not a clown, a father." Traoré speaks for us all. Say his name, Zacharia. In Washington, D.C., a group of African immigrants gathered outside the embassy, placing children's shoes at the gate in silence. Even in Paris, where the African diaspora often felt ignored, a woman held her baby close and whispered through tears, "I wish my son had a leader like him." Inside the studio, producers were overwhelmed. They'd never seen anything like it. The live chat had reached over 20 million messages. Then a French journalist on the panel finally spoke. "You didn't just expose Trump," she told Traoré. "You exposed the world's silence." Traoré didn't smile. He simply nodded and said, "I didn't want to expose anything. I wanted to survive." And now, that survival was echoing across the globe. Just when the atmosphere reached its emotional peak, the studio anchor received a file from her earpiece. She paused, listened, and then stared at the camera. "We've just been sent something shocking," she said. "A U.S. soldier, anonymous, has leaked drone footage from the day Zacharia died." The screen behind them flickered. The room tensed. And then it played. The infrared footage showed small figures running. A little boy with outstretched arms chasing something in the sky. No weapons, no military, just children. Then suddenly, a white flash. The screen went black. A soft gasp escaped from the audience. One anchor turned her face away, crying into her hand. The anchor continued reading the anonymous message. "We knew it was a mistake. We weren't allowed to speak. I couldn't live with it. I hope this brings justice." Trump's face flushed red. He looked away. Traoré simply closed his eyes. "I begged for that footage for 2 years, he whispered. "They told me it didn't exist." Now the world had seen it. The lie was dead. The silence was broken. And for the first time, even Trump looked ashamed. Traoré finally spoke again, quietly. "I want to tell you how I met Zacharia," he said. The studio dimmed. Cameras zoomed in. The room leaned in, breathless. "I was visiting a school in a small village. I saw this boy running barefoot through the field. I asked him why he was smiling. He paused, smiling faintly. He said, 'I think the clouds are laughing today.'" The studio was silent. 3 days later I came back, but the school was gone, burned, bodies everywhere. I helped dig a mass grave. His voice cracked. I remember kneeling beside a small, twisted body, a melted toy plane next to him. He looked at the camera. I didn't know his name until his mother found me and begged me to find justice. He turned to Trump. You called me a clown, but a clown wears paint. My face is stained with the dust of buried children. Trump opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then a child's voice rang from the studio speakers. Captain Ibrahim, thank you. It was Miriam's voice, off air from backstage. And suddenly, everyone in the studio was crying. The camera panned slowly across the studio. The lights were still blazing. The screens still glowed. But the room was now haunted by truth. Trump sat like a statue, his lips pressed, hands folded. A man who built his legacy on boldness now looked exposed. A hush filled the studio. Then Traoré leaned in, breaking the silence. You had everything, he said gently. Power, money, a voice that echoed across nations. He paused, eyes locked on Trump. But when you had the chance to speak for justice, you chose silence. Trump didn't respond. I don't hate you, Traoré continued. I pity you. He turned to the camera, not to speak to presidents or politicians, but to the world. Let this be a lesson, he said. Our lives are not jokes. Our grief is not entertainment. He placed his hand on the small folded Burkina flag. And children should never be forgotten. Somewhere in the crowd, a man began to clap, then a woman, then the whole room. And as the applause swelled, the world shifted. The segment was ending. Cameras started fading to outro graphics. But Traoré held up one hand. There's one more thing, he said. He reached into his breast pocket and slowly pulled out a small plastic toy, faded, burned around the edges. It was Zacharia's melted toy plane. I kept this, Traoré said, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. He turned it over in his hand, his voice trembling. This plane was made from trash, yet Zacharia still believed it could fly. He looked into the camera again. If a broken child in a forgotten village can believe in something as impossible as flight, then maybe we can believe in something too. The screen behind him lit up with images. Zacharia's village rebuilt, children playing soccer, mothers laughing, schools being opened by young Burkina engineers. This isn't my fight anymore, Traoré said. It's yours. It's everyone's. He placed the toy on the desk, beside the bloodstained flag. And without another word, he stood. The studio rose with him. Even Trump stood, not to speak, but to acknowledge. And for once in world history, truth had won without war. The final frame was simple. Traoré standing tall, behind him the flag, the toy, the child's voice that still echoed. Miriam ran to him from backstage. She hugged his leg tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Traoré knelt and said softly, No, thank you for being brave. Then he turned to the crowd, to the cameras, to the millions watching across the planet. This wasn't a debate, he said. This was a mirror. Now it's up to you. What do you see? And with that, he walked off set, calm, quiet, but forever changed. The live stream chat exploded. I've never cried like this before. He didn't just win, he healed. Captain Traoré is the definition of a real leader. How can I support Burkina Faso? And now, to my amazing viewers reading this, you are the voice that continues this story. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Let it out. Tell Zacharia's story. Like this video to honor the children the world forgot. And hit subscribe to never miss a truth that matters. Together, let's make sure silence never wins again.